Welcome back. Today we'll discuss the first attempt to decipher the Rosetta Stone. From the very beginning, there was no mystery about what the Rosetta Stone said. Many of the savants in Egypt with Bonaparte could read the Greek section. It was basically a thank you note written in 196 BC from the priests of Egypt to King Ptolemy V, the Greek ruler of Egypt. Ptolemy had granted some favors to the priests, especially reducing their taxes. So they erected the stela to thank him. After listing the specific benefits granted to the priests, they also thank him for general kindness to the people, releasing prisoners, restoring sacred buildings, and things like that. Stelae, which is the plural of stela, were the bulletin boards of ancient Egypt. If you wanted something known, you carved it on a round-top stone and erected it in front of a temple, where everyone would see it. The Rosetta Stone was one of these. The hieroglyphic script at the top is the most damaged, and a great deal of it's missing. Originally, the stela was round-topped and probably had a winged sun at the top and a procession of the gods with Pharaoh Ptolemy V. The second script was called Demotic by Herodotus, from the Greek for people, because it was what the people used for business, letters, and things like that. It's an extremely cursive form of hieroglyphs, used extensively during the late and Ptolemaic periods. The Greek script, at the bottom, is the most complete and is important for several reasons. First, it gave a readable version of the text. Second, at the end, it says that the stela contained the same message in sacred characters, hieroglyphs, native characters, demotic, and Greek characters. This was a critical bit of information. It made clear that the three scripts all said the same thing, and thus provided a strategy for decipherment. Third, it provided the name Ptolemy, which would prove to be the most important of all clues. The French discovered the Rosetta Stone, but it was an Englishman who started the ball rolling. Thomas Young was perhaps the greatest scientist of his time. A polymath, he's best remembered for the wave theory of light, but he also made contributions to physiology and, as we shall see, Egyptology. Schooled in Greek, Latin, and other languages, he began working on deciphering the Rosetta Stone during his summer vacations. But Young was working under the mistaken belief that hieroglyphs were primarily ideographic, that they were picture writing. As we'll see, he was not the only one laboring under what I call the big mistake. His great insight, however, was that the name Ptolemy, which he saw in the Greek text, must also appear in the demotic and hieroglyphic text as well. He realized that the hieroglyphs and demotic characters for the name couldn't be ideographic. It couldn't be a picture, because there's no picture of what a Ptolemy looked like. So at least, for names, there must be an alphabet. Others before Young had suggested that the ovals, called cartouches by Bonaparte's men, because they looked like cartridge shells, held the names of the kings. Young agreed, and he began to work on the cartouche. He figured that hieroglyphs inside the cartouche must correspond to letters of the alphabet, spelling out Ptolemy. The rectangle must be a P. The semicircle, a T. The loop, an O. The lion, an L. The statue base, an M. The reed leaf, right, maybe a Y with the reed leaves. And the folded cloth, an S. Ptolemus. The Greek version of the name is actually Ptolemaios, but it's pretty close. Young figured out this approximation. He now had 7 letters of the alphabet. Decipherment wasn't easy. To give you an idea of what this pioneering work was like, let me put you in Thomas Young's shoes for a couple of minutes. I want you to look at a temple wall and see what you can figure out. Remember, at this stage, Thomas Young knew less about hieroglyphs and Egyptian civilization than you do. Before we get to the hieroglyphs, let's look at the big picture. We can see two people making offerings to the gods. The man holds an incense burner. Incense was called what the gods like to smell. He wears the double crown, the tall white crown of Upper Egypt and the short red crown of Lower Egypt. So he's probably a king. There are two cartouches in front of him, so that's more evidence that he's the king. Behind him, we see a queen. We can see her cartouches too. She's wearing an elaborate headdress consisting of horns and a solar disk, often worn by the goddesses Isis and Hathor. In her right hand, she holds a sistrum, a musical instrument a bit like a rattle that was used in rituals. In her other hand, she holds a keyhole-shaped object called a menat. Priestesses of Hathor often wore heavy decorative pectorals around their necks. This would have created a strain on the neck, so they wore menats, counterweights made of metal that hung down the back. It took the weight off the neck. So we have a king and a queen making offerings to the gods. But who are the king and queen? That's the kind of question Thomas Young was wrestling with. Let's look at the cartouches. Ladies first. Let's begin with the one in front. First hieroglyph? It's small, just above the lion's back. It's the hill sign, a Q. You'll remember a lion was an L in Ptolemaic times. So we have QL. But from our earlier discussions, you know the Q was also a K. So you've probably already figured out it's Cleopatra. We can see the lasso O that was used in Ptolemaic times. There's the rectangle P. We have a vulture A. We have a hand beneath the vulture, and beneath that is our mouth R. And finally, another vulture, Cleopatra. You were right. On either side of the last vulture are an egg and a loaf T. Both indicate a female name. Young would figure that out later. You probably noticed that the cartouche has been defaced. The animals have been chiseled out. It's strange, and I don't know why this was done. In later times, the Christians chiseled out the faces of the gods and kings and queens so they would lose their powers. That, by the way, is where we get our term defaced. But just defacing the animals is very unusual. Okay, we have Cleopatra. But which one? There were 7 Cleopatras. Let's look at her other cartouche. This one reads from right to left, so we start with P, T, O, L. You've got it already, Ptolemy. This just reaffirms that our queen is a Ptolemy. There's an M, the statue base M, under the lion, then the double reed leaf, which is a Y, then a folded cloth S for the Greek ending, Ptolemus. Now, all the other hieroglyphs that follow would tell us which Cleopatra she is, if we could decipher them. But like Thomas Young, we can't, so we don't know. But we can, however, spot a name we know at the bottom right of the cartouche. Do you see it? Ptah. So this queen has Ptah in her title. Just to the left of the Ptah is the name Isis. It's the throne and egg and T hieroglyphs. We'll talk about all the names of the gods in a later lecture. But you can see how difficult it is to figure things out. That's what Thomas Young was up against. Now you can have more sympathy for the difficulty of his task. But can we figure out something about the king? The cartouche in front of him is easy for us, Ptolemy. But that's all it says. It doesn't even give a clue to which Ptolemy. And there were more than a dozen. The second cartouche will reveal his identity, if we can read it. Let's take Thomas Young's approach. Let's sound it out a letter at a time. First letter? Yes, basket K. Next letter? Yes, the double read. Remember, this is a right-to-left reading text. So we have KY. Next is the folded cloth, giving us KYS. Now the lion's tricky. We know it was used for the L in Cleopatra and in Ptolemy. However, it's sometimes also doubled as an R, and that's what it's doing here. This gave all the decipherers problems for a while, but they figured it out eventually. But again, it wasn't easy. Okay, we have K, Y, S, R. Then a bolt Z below, K, Y, S, R, Z. Where does the name end? How long do we have to keep going? That's another problem we have to deal with. Well, the next group of 4 hieroglyphs is our answer. Young saw this phrase, these 4 hieroglyphs, over and over again at the end of different names. It means living forever. But Young didn't know this. But he did deduce that it couldn't be part of the name. It must be something like a title or an epithet. So, we know where the name ends. The entire name is KYSRZ. Who's that? We have to keep saying it aloud, trying to hear a name. We know the queen is a Cleopatra. Whose name, during that period of Egyptian history, sounds like Kaiserus? Caesar. Yes, it's the Roman Caesar. But it isn't Julius Caesar. Cleopatra named their son Caesar after his father. And that's who we see here. Cleopatra and her son Caesar, shown as king of Egypt. Later, he would be known as Caesarion, Little Caesar. So we are looking at Cleopatra VII, the last Ptolemy to rule Egypt. But you can see how difficult it is at the beginning of decipherment. It wasn't just, oh, the Rosetta Stone was found and that did it. It took 20 years. Young was a pioneer and a very smart guy. Young published his findings in the 1819 supplement to the Encyclopedia Britannica, 20 years after the Rosetta Stone was discovered. He presented his partial alphabet and also made some correct guesses, and some incorrect ones too, for groups of words. But he never took it much further. The problem was that he never gave up his conviction that hieroglyphs were ideograms, an idea that was firmly entrenched for centuries. You see, in the 5th century, a mysterious Egyptian named Horapollo wrote Hieroglyphica, the earliest work on hieroglyphs. We know little about him. Some scholars even think his book was written as late as the 11th century. But his name is a great combination of Egyptian and Greek. Hor, the first part, is the ancient Egyptian name for Horus, the falcon god. The Greeks added the US ending, Horus. Apollo, of course, is the Greek god of music. So my bet is that he was an Egyptian who spoke Greek. In his book, he explains how hieroglyphs work. Even though he's an Egyptian, living only a century after the last hieroglyphic inscription was written, he clearly doesn't have a full grasp of how hieroglyphs work. For example, he's correct when he says that the duck hieroglyph represents the word son, S-O-N, a male offspring. But the explanation he offers is dead wrong. The reason he gives is that the duck fights so fiercely for its offspring that it's associated with children. Horopalo believes, incorrectly, that hieroglyphs are basically picture writing, that the duck represents a duck, and one of the properties of a duck fighting fiercely for its young determines the meaning. Actually, the duck phonetically represents the syllable sa. It's what we call a biliteral, a hieroglyph that represents two sounds, the S and the A. We'll learn about biliterals soon. There are even hieroglyphs that represent three sounds, one after the other. We'll see one later today. But now, back to our word, sa. The word sa in ancient Egyptian meant sun. So the duck has phonetic value, not ideographic. It's not a picture. This book by Horopalo, presenting the big mistake, threw off everyone who wanted to decipher hieroglyphs. But it's not all his fault. From the 3rd century on, many students of the occult believed that there was a corpus of secret texts written by Hermes Trismegistus, thrice great Hermes. Written in mystical hieroglyphs, these texts were intended to be kept secret, revealed only to the initiated. This belief in the essential secret nature of hieroglyphs permeated the study of Egyptian texts right up to the Renaissance. No one imagined hieroglyphs were used to record history or workmen's wages. They were sacred texts of Hermes Trismegistus. The only problem was Hermes never existed. The belief in Hermes also lasted into the Renaissance and greatly influenced Athanasius Kircher's attempt to decipher. Kircher has been called the last man who knew everything. A Jesuit, he was by many accounts a genius in several disciplines. He built automata, studied volcanoes and botany, was a master of a dozen languages, and was considered by some to be the greatest mind of the 17th century. Others considered him a fraud. For much of his life, he lived in Rome and worked under the protection of the Pope. This was an era when obelisks that Roman emperors had brought from Egypt were being rediscovered beneath the streets of Rome and re-erected. Kircher turned his extensive learning to the task of translating the hieroglyphs on Rome's obelisks. The word obelisk is not Egyptian. It's Greek. When the Greeks first entered Egypt and saw these tall, pointy things, they reminded them of meat skewers, as in shish kebab. That's what obeliscus means, a meat skewer. This was the ancient Egyptian word in hieroglyphs. How was it pronounced? That's right, techen. The last hieroglyph is the determinative. It's an obelisk on its base. Notice the arrangements of the hieroglyphs. It's compact and pleasing. It could have been written as individual hieroglyphs in a row, like this. But that's not as elegant as grouping the loaf and the placenta together above the water sign. Obelisks almost always came in pairs, placed in front of temples to proclaim who built the temple. They never had anything mysterious or significant inscribed on them. Working in the Hermetic tradition, however, Kircher believed the hieroglyphs were picture writing and contained wisdom of the ancients. He was guessing when he claimed that they had religious significance. He translated most of the obelisks in Rome, but it was pure fantasy. They merely contained the names and titles of the pharaohs who erected them in Egypt. Everyone trying to translate hieroglyphs was still making the big mistake. But we don't have to. So get on your scribe's robes. It's time for hieroglyphs and real translations. Last time, I gave you a few sentences to translate from English to hieroglyphs. Let's see how you did. The first sentence was, the woman does not know this man. Start with the verb, chem, to not know. Next, we put woman. No need for the article the. There's no such thing in ancient Egyptian. Remember, we don't always need the stroke for the word woman. It's written both with and without it. Now we add this man. Man is clearly masculine, so we use the masculine form of this, pen. Remember that this follows the noun, and that's it. The woman does not know this man. This would have been pronounced something like chem zet z pen. Our next sentence was Ray and Ptah are together in this place. Start with the verb, to be. You. That will give us the are part of the sentence. Now we add the subjects, the gods, Ray and Ptah, and we join them with our word for together with, henna. So now we have our verb and subjects. Let's add in, which is the owl. Last, we have to say this place. Well, place is bu. Since it doesn't end in a T, it's masculine. We know we must use the masculine form of this, which is pen. And we remember that this follows the noun, so the whole sentence reads, you, Ray, henna, Ptah, em, bu, pen. Good. The next sentence was the man does not know another thing. Well, we all know we start with the verb. Next, the subject, man. We know there are no articles in ancient Egyptian, no thes or us, so we just write man. Another comes next, but we have to determine if thing is masculine or feminine, so we can decide which another to use. Well, chet is feminine. It ends in a T. So we know we must use the feminine form of another, ket. This adjective, another, comes in front of the noun. We have to remember that. So the whole sentence is kem, z, ket, chet. Good. Our last sentence was the woman knows this man. Start with the verb, rech, to know. Next, the subject, woman. Last, we need this man. It's obviously masculine, so for the this, we need pen, and it goes after the noun. And now we've got it. Well done. Let's learn some more words so we can say more complex things. We want to get past see-spot run kind of sentences. Let's start with a few more verbs. I'll give you the hieroglyphs, and you tell me how they're pronounced. It's good practice. Here's one. How's it pronounced? That's right, ched. The boat doesn't have a phonetic value. It's a determinative and helps us determine the meaning of the word. So we know it has something to do with boats. The word means to fare downstream. Okay, next word. How's it pronounced? Yes, something like ha. Again, the feet are a determinative, not pronounced, but telling us the word has something to do with walking. The word means to go down or descend. Good. Let me show you a similar word, not to be confused with ha. How would you pronounce it? Yes, hab. It means to send. So that I don't confuse similar words, I try to make up mnemonic devices to remember them. So for Hob, I try to think of sending my friend Hobbs somewhere. Whatever works for you. Let's learn another verb. Here it is. This is an unusual one. Look at it. You won't be able to tell me how it's pronounced because it's tricky. The ear hieroglyph, that's our first hieroglyph, an ear, is a triliteral representing three sounds, one after the other. S, J, and M. It's as if we wrote the folded cloth, serpent, and owl, one after the other. It's pronounced sejum, and the word means to hear. The owl is just a phonetic complement, a bonus to remind you how it's pronounced. To pronounce it, we put in the short E vowels, but we're not sure we're right. Remember, we have learned the alphabet, hieroglyphs representing just one sound. But there are other hieroglyphs that represent two sounds called biliterals, and some that represent three sounds. The ear hieroglyph is one of the triliterals. When you add this word to your dictionary, add it on the S page, since it begins with an S sound. Now, let's add another word for boat. Pronounced depot. This is the kind of boat people used. But let me show you another kind of boat. Here it is. How's it pronounced? Wea. It's a sacred boat, one in which a god might ride across the sky. We're just beginning our study of Middle Egyptian, and already we have three words with the boat hieroglyph. Boats were very important in ancient Egypt. Besides walking, if you wanted to cover a long distance, a boat was your only option. So when the Egyptians imagined the journey to the next world, it was in a sacred boat. In temples, a statue of the god was kept in a sealed room called the Holy of Holies. At festival times, the statue was placed inside a gilded wood shrine and carried out to the temple courtyard for the people to see. That shrine was shaped like a boat, a wea, a sacred boat. Carved on the walls of Karnak and Luxor Temple are scenes of shaven-headed priests carrying the boat shrine. Now, let me give you a strange-looking word. It's unusual. It seems to have two determinatives, a face in profile and a papyrus roll. Let's pronounce it first and then figure out what's going on. How would you pronounce it? Reshwet. Good. That's right. Reshwet. That's how it probably sounded. The word means joy or gladness. I think the profile is there because you see joy or gladness on the face. The papyrus roll, which usually determines abstract things, may be there because joy or gladness is an internal state. That's just a guess, pure surmise. The ancient scribes never left us an explanation. Let's look at another word with a papyrus roll determinative. It's pronounced secher and means plan or counsel. Again, an abstract concept, but not something you can touch. Here's our last word. Can you tell me how the top hieroglyph is being used? Is it a phonetic hieroglyph, a determinative, or an ideogram? The stroke tells us it's an ideogram. It's a picture of what it means. Now the problem is, what's it a picture of? The word means town. What we are looking at is a crossroads. And where two roads cross, you have a town. We also know it's feminine because we have the loaf T. From other contexts, I can tell you it was pronounced niwit, niwit. This is one that would be added to our dictionary in our end page because it begins with the sound mm. Okay, that's enough words for today. I don't want to overload you. Be sure to add them to your personal dictionary in alphabetical order. But you're not getting off without homework. Let me give you 4 sentences to translate into hieroglyphs. First, Ptah goes down in another boat. Be careful. This is just go down, not fare downstream. Next, when this man fares downstream, the city is in joy. Now let me tell you, there's no word for when in Middle Egyptian. So you don't translate it, it's understood. Next, this woman listens to Ptah. And last, a man is there in the city. Next time, we'll see more progress towards decipherment, and we'll also see how you did on the new sentences. I'll see you then.